My name is Sarah, and 3 weeks ago at our family Thanksgiving dinner, my older sister Jessica stood up in front of 23 relatives and announced that I was adopted. She said it with the kind of cruel satisfaction that only comes from someone who's been saving their most devastating weapon for the perfect moment to destroy you. What Jessica didn't know was that I'd been carrying a letter in my purse for 2 months. A letter I'd found hidden in her old bedroom that would shatter not just her moment of triumph, but the entire foundation of lies our family had been built on for the past 31 years. But to understand how we got to that moment, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to when I was 7 years old and first started noticing that I was different from everyone else in my family. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, in a house that always smelled like my mom's lavender candles and fresh coffee. My parents, Robert and Linda Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan in the early 1980s, a few years before my sister Jessica was born. They'd worked incredibly hard to build a life in America, my dad as an engineer and my mom as a nurse, always emphasizing education and family loyalty above everything else. Jessica was 5 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, she was everything I wasn't. She had my parents' straight black hair, their almond-shaped eyes, their petite build. She spoke Mandarin fluently, picked up on cultural references that went over my head, and seemed to instinctively understand family dynamics that always felt foreign to me. I, on the other hand, was obviously different. I had curly auburn hair that my mom spent hours trying to straighten, green eyes that looked nothing like anyone else's in our family photos, and I was tall and athletic where everyone else was small and delicate. I struggled with languages, couldn't master chopsticks until I was 12, and always felt like I was performing a role I'd never quite learned properly. But here's the thing. My parents never made me feel different. Never made me feel less than. Never gave me any reason to think I was anything other than their beloved youngest daughter. "Sarah's our little rebel," my dad would say proudly when I'd come home muddy from soccer practice, while Jessica sat at the kitchen table working on her homework in pristine clothes. "Every family needs someone to shake things up," my mom would add, ruffling my unruly hair with genuine affection. They celebrated my differences, encouraged my independence, and made sure I knew I was loved exactly as I was. It was only Jessica who seemed to have a problem with my existence. The comments started early and were always delivered with just enough sweetness to make them seem harmless to adults who weren't paying close attention. "Sarah's so lucky she doesn't have to worry about maintaining family traditions," Jessica would say when I'd skip Chinese New Year preparations to go to soccer practice. "It must be nice not to feel pressure to represent the family properly," she'd comment when I'd choose pizza over the elaborate meals my mom would prepare for special occasions. "Sarah's always been more American than the rest of us," she'd tell relatives when I'd struggle to pronounce Chinese words or forget cultural customs. Each comment was designed to highlight my otherness, to make me feel like an outsider in my own family. And the worst part was, they worked. By the time I was in middle school, I was convinced that something was fundamentally wrong with me, that I was a disappointment to parents who deserved a daughter who fit their expectations better. The feeling of being different followed me through high school and into college. I threw myself into academics and athletics, partly because I genuinely enjoyed them, but partly because I was trying to prove that I belonged, that I was worthy of being a Chen, even if I didn't look like one. I graduated valedictorian from high school, got a full scholarship to Stanford, and majored in computer science with a minor in business. Jessica, meanwhile, had struggled academically, dropped out of college after 2 years, and was working a series of part-time jobs while living in my parents' basement. The dynamic between us shifted during those college years. Suddenly, I was the daughter my parents bragged about to their friends. I was the one bringing home achievements and accolades. I was the one making them proud in ways that Jessica, despite looking exactly like them, never seemed to manage. Jessica didn't handle this reversal well. The comments became sharper, more pointed, designed to cut deeper. "Must be nice to have no cultural baggage holding you back," she'd say when I'd get promoted at internships. "I guess some people don't feel the pressure of family expectations the way others do," she'd comment when I'd announce new achievements. "It's different when you don't really understand what sacrifice means to this family," she'd say when I'd talk about my plans for the future. But I was too focused on building my career to really process what Jessica was implying with these comments. After graduation, I got a job at a tech startup in San Francisco, working insane hours, but loving every minute of it. I was good at what I did, really good, and within 3 years I'd been promoted to senior developer. That's when everything in my life accelerated in ways I'd never expected. The startup I was working for developed an app that revolutionized how small businesses manage their inventory. What had started as a simple solution to a common problem became something that major corporations wanted to license. Within 6 months, we went from a 20-person company operating out of a converted warehouse to the hottest acquisition target in Silicon Valley. When Google bought us for $47 million, my small equity stake suddenly became worth $1.2 million. At 26 years old, I was officially a millionaire. The money was life-changing, but not in the ways people might expect. I didn't buy a mansion or a sports car or start living extravagantly. Instead, I bought a modest condo in the city, invested most of the money conservatively, and kept working because I loved what I did. But the money did give me something invaluable: security. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about proving my worth through achievements. I could make choices based on what I wanted rather than what I thought would make other people proud of me. My parents were thrilled about my success, bragging to anyone who would listen about their daughter, the tech executive. They'd always been proud of me, but now they had concrete evidence to point to when relatives would ask about their children's accomplishments. Jessica, on the other hand, became increasingly bitter. "Must be nice to get lucky," she'd say when family members would congratulate me on the acquisition. "Some people just fall into good situations," she'd comment when my parents would mention my success. "It's easier when you don't have the same obligations the rest of us do," she'd mutter when I'd talk about my work or my future plans. I started to realize that Jessica wasn't just jealous of my professional success. She seemed to genuinely resent my existence, as if my achievements somehow diminished her own worth in our parents' eyes. The tension came to a head 2 years ago at my cousin Michael's wedding. It was a big family affair, the kind of celebration where 3 generations of Khans gathered to eat too much food and catch up on everyone's lives. I was sitting at the family table, wearing a dress I'd bought for the occasion, when Jessica made a comment that stopped all conversation. "You know," she said loudly enough for the entire table to hear, "Sarah's always been different from the rest of us. Sometimes I wonder if there's a reason for that." The table went quiet. My aunt stopped mid-sentence in her conversation about her son's medical school applications. My uncle put down his chopsticks and stared at Jessica with confusion. "What do you mean by that?" my mom asked, her voice carrying a warning that Jessica either didn't hear or chose to ignore. "I just mean that Sarah's never really fit in with family traditions, has she? She's always been more independent, like she doesn't feel the same connections the rest of us do." I could feel heat rising in my cheeks, that familiar shame that Jessica's comments always triggered. "Jessica," my dad said firmly, "that's enough." But Jessica wasn't done. "I'm not saying it's a bad thing," she continued, her voice sweet but her eyes hard. "I'm just saying that sometimes people have different origins that affect how they relate to family." The word origins hung in the air like a weapon. Everyone at the table understood what Jessica was implying. even if she wasn't saying it directly. That night, I confronted my parents in private. "Is there something you're not telling me about my birth?" I asked them directly. My mom's face went pale, and she exchanged a look with my dad that made my heart stop. "Sarah, honey," my mom said carefully, "you are our daughter. You have always been our daughter. Nothing else matters." "That's not what I asked," I said. "Jessica keeps making these comments about my origins, about how I'm different. Is there a reason for that?" My dad took my hands in his, looking directly into my eyes. "Sarah, you were wanted and loved from the moment you came into our lives. The circumstances of how you became our daughter don't change the fact that you are our daughter." It wasn't a denial, but it wasn't a confirmation either. It was the kind of careful non-answer that confirmed Jessica's implications without actually admitting anything. I went home that night with more questions than answers, but I didn't push the issue. My parents clearly weren't ready to have that conversation, and honestly, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear whatever truth they were protecting me from. But Jessica's comments continued at every family gathering, each one a little sharper, a little more pointed. "Sarah's never been interested in family history," she'd say when my mom would talk about relatives in Taiwan. "Some people just don't feel those deep family connections," she'd comment when cousins would discuss visiting ancestral homes. "It's different when you don't share the same background," she'd say when I'd miss cultural references or family jokes. Each comment chipped away at my sense of belonging, making me feel like an imposter in my own family. But I endured them because confronting Jessica directly would mean forcing my parents to have a conversation they clearly weren't ready for. Everything changed 3 months ago when my parents decided to downsize from the house I'd grown up in to a smaller place in a retirement community. They asked Jessica and me to help clean out the house, to go through decades of accumulated belongings and decide what to keep, donate, or throw away. I was in Jessica's old bedroom, packing up books and decorations she'd left behind when she'd moved out years earlier, when I found something that changed everything. Hidden behind her dresser, probably dropped and forgotten years ago, was an envelope addressed to my parents. The return address was from a law firm I didn't recognize, and it was postmarked from 31 years ago. 31 years ago. The year I was born. I should have given the letter to my parents immediately. I should have respected their privacy and let them decide whether to share whatever information it contained. Instead, I opened it. The letter was from an attorney representing someone named Catherine Williams. It was brief and formal, but the contents made my hands shake as I read. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Chen, our client, Catherine Williams, has asked us to provide you with this update regarding the child you adopted through our firm in March 1992. As requested in your adoption agreement, we are writing to inform you that Ms. Williams has established a trust fund for the child's future education and welfare. The current value of this trust is $847,000, and it will become accessible to the child on their 18th birthday, provided they choose to make contact. Ms. Williams wanted you to know that this gift comes with no strings attached and no expectation of contact. She simply wants to ensure that her biological daughter has every opportunity for success in life. Please find enclosed the contact information for the trust administrator and instructions for how to access these funds when the time comes. Ms. Williams continues to respect your family's privacy and has no intention of disrupting the life you've built together. This is simply her way of providing for her daughter's future from a distance. Sincerely, Richardson Associates." I read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. I was adopted. My biological mother had set up a trust fund worth nearly $1 million that I'd never known about. And somehow, this letter had ended up hidden in Jessica's room instead of with my parents. The date on the letter was from when I was 5 years old. Jessica would have been 10, old enough to understand what adoption meant, old enough to intercept mail, old enough to hide a letter that was meant for our parents. I sat on Jessica's old bed, holding this piece of paper that explained so much about my life, and I realized that my sister had known the truth about my adoption for over 25 years. She'd been using that knowledge to make me feel like an outsider in my own family, all while hiding information that my biological mother had specifically wanted my parents to have. But there was more. The letter mentioned that the trust fund would be accessible when I turned 18. I was now 31 years old. If this trust still existed, it had been sitting there unclaimed for 13 years, growing with interest and investments. I took photos of the letter with my phone and carefully put the original back where I'd found it. I needed time to process this information, to decide how to handle a revelation that would change everything about my family dynamics. The first thing I did was contact Richardson Associates to see if the law firm still existed and if the trust was still active. The original attorney had retired, but his son now ran the practice and remembered my case. "Miss Chen," he said when I called and explained who I was, "we've been hoping to hear from you for over a decade. Your biological mother has been asking about you regularly." "The trust fund mentioned in the letter," I said, "does it still exist?" "Oh yes," he said. "With compound interest and careful investments, it's now worth approximately $2.8 million. Your biological mother has continued to contribute to it over the years, even though she was never required to do so." $2.8 million. My biological mother, a woman I'd never met, had been quietly building a fortune for my future while I'd spent my entire life feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. "There's something else," the attorney continued. "Catherine Williams has written you a letter every year on your birthday since you were placed for adoption. We have 31 letters waiting for you if you'd like to read them." 31 letters. 31 years of a mother I'd never known thinking about me, caring about me, making sure I was provided for even from a distance. "She's also expressed interest in meeting you, if you're open to that," he said. "But only if you want to. She's been very clear that this has to be your choice entirely." I made an appointment to visit the law firm the following week. I needed to read those letters, to understand who this woman was and why she'd given me up for adoption. I needed to see the trust fund documents and understand what this inheritance meant for my future. But first, I needed to decide what to do about Jessica. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Jessica had spent years making me feel like an outsider, using information she'd stolen to psychologically torment me. She'd known I was adopted, known there was money waiting for me, known I had a biological mother who cared about me, and she'd kept all of that from me out of what could only be described as pure malice. She'd stolen 13 years of my life that I could have spent knowing the truth about myself. When I visited the law firm and read Catherine Williams' letters, my anger toward Jessica only grew. These weren't the letters of a woman who'd abandoned her child carelessly. They were the letters of a teenager who'd gotten pregnant in high school, made the difficult decision to place her baby for adoption with a loving family, and had spent the next 31 years loving me from afar. Catherine had been 17 when she'd gotten pregnant. The father was her high school boyfriend who'd broken up with her when she'd told him about the pregnancy. Her parents had given her two choices: abortion or adoption. She'd chosen adoption because she wanted me to have a life she couldn't provide. In her letters, she wrote about finishing high school, going to college, becoming a successful real estate developer. She wrote about the family she'd eventually built, a husband and 2 children who knew about me and hoped to meet me someday. She wrote about putting money away for my education, my future, my dreams, even though she didn't know what those dreams might be. "I hope you're happy," she wrote in the letter from my 18th birthday. "I hope your parents have given you all the love and opportunities I wanted you to have. I hope you know that not a day goes by that I don't think about you and wonder what kind of amazing person you've become. Each letter was signed with "All my love, Catherine," and included updates about her life, photos of her family, and always, always, expressions of love and hope for my happiness. Reading those letters, I realized that I'd spent my entire life feeling like I didn't belong to anyone, when the truth was that I belonged to multiple people. I had parents who'd raised me with love and dedication, and I had a biological mother who'd loved me enough to give me a better life and had never stopped caring about my welfare. I also realized that Jessica had stolen all of this from me. She'd robbed me of years of knowing who I really was, of having a complete picture of my identity, of understanding that being adopted didn't make me less loved, it made me more loved. When I finally met Catherine Williams 2 weeks later, it was like looking into a mirror of my future. She had my curly hair, my green eyes, my height and build. She had my laugh and my stubborn streak and my tendency to talk with my hands when I got excited. "You're so beautiful," she said when we met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, tears streaming down her face. "You're everything I hoped you'd become." We talked for 4 hours that first meeting. She told me about the decision to place me for adoption, about choosing my parents specifically because they'd promised to love me unconditionally and give me every opportunity. She told me about following my achievements from a distance, about being proud of my academic and professional success, about wanting to reach out but respecting the boundaries of our arrangement. "Your parents are wonderful people," she said. "They kept their promises to me. They gave you everything I wanted you to have." She also told me about the trust fund, about how she'd been adding to it over the years, about her hope that it would give me security and freedom to pursue whatever made me happy. "It's yours," she said simply. "It always has been. I just wanted to make sure you had choices in life." Meeting Catherine didn't diminish my love for my parents. If anything, it made me appreciate them more. They'd taken in a baby who wasn't biologically theirs and raised her with the same love and dedication they'd shown their biological daughter. They'd celebrated my differences instead of trying to change me. They'd supported my dreams even when those dreams didn't match their expectations. But it also gave me something I'd been missing my entire life: a complete sense of self. I understood now why I looked different, why I had different interests and abilities, why I'd always felt like I was performing a role that didn't quite fit. I wasn't broken or wrong or insufficient. I was exactly who I was supposed to be. I also understood why Jessica had been so threatened by my existence. She'd known from the time she was 10 years old that I was adopted, that I had a biological mother who loved me, that there was money set aside for my future. She'd seen me as competition for our parents' affections, as someone who had advantages she didn't have access to. But instead of talking to our parents about her feelings, instead of processing her insecurities in healthy ways, she'd chosen to use her knowledge as a weapon against me. For 3 months, I carried all of this information alone. I spent time getting to know Catherine and her family, building a relationship with the biological mother I'd never known existed. I worked with the law firm to access the trust fund, which was now worth just over $3 million. I processed the complex emotions of learning that my entire sense of self had been built on incomplete information. But I didn't tell my parents or Jessica about any of it. I needed time to understand how this revelation would change my family dynamics, and I wanted to choose the right moment to share what I'd learned. That moment came at Thanksgiving. My parents hosted the dinner as they did every year, inviting aunts and uncles and cousins for a meal that always lasted hours and involved multiple courses of both American and Chinese dishes. I arrived with a bottle of wine and the carefully maintained facade of the Sarah everyone expected me to be. Jessica was already there, helping in the kitchen and playing the role of the dutiful eldest daughter. She greeted me with the same fake warmth she'd been perfecting for years. "Sarah, so good to see you. How's the tech world treating you?" "Can't complain," I said, giving her a hug that felt like embracing a snake. Dinner proceeded normally for the first hour. We made small talk about jobs and relationships and current events. My parents beamed with pride when relatives asked about my work, and Jessica smiled tightly whenever my achievements were mentioned. I was starting to think we'd make it through the meal without incident when my cousin Jennifer announced her engagement to her longtime boyfriend. "David proposed last weekend," she said, showing off her ring to excited squeals from the female relatives. "We're thinking about a spring wedding." Everyone congratulated Jennifer and started asking about wedding plans, venue options, guest lists. It was exactly the kind of family celebration that should have been purely joyful. That's when Jessica decided to drop her bomb. "It's so wonderful when families come together," she said, raising her wine glass in what appeared to be a toast. "It makes you think about what family really means, doesn't it?" She paused, looking around the table at faces that were beginning to show confusion at her tone. "I mean, some of us are connected by blood, some by choice, some by other circumstances." My stomach dropped. I could see where this was heading, could feel the malicious intent behind her words. "Jessica," my mom said quietly, "what are you talking about?" "Oh, I just think it's interesting how families are formed," Jessica continued, her voice getting louder and more theatrical. "Take Sarah, for example. She's such an important part of our family, even though she's not technically." "Jessica, stop," my dad said firmly. But Jessica was beyond stopping. She stood up, wine glass still in hand, and delivered the blow she'd been saving for years. "Even though Sarah's adopted," she announced to the table of shocked relatives. The silence that followed was deafening. 23 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me, some shocked, some confused, some clearly wondering if they'd misheard. "That's right," Jessica continued, emboldened by the attention. "Sarah isn't actually Mom and Dad's biological daughter. She was adopted as a baby. I've known for years, but I thought it was time everyone understood the real family dynamics here." I could see my parents' faces crumpling with horror and pain. I could see relatives looking back and forth between Jessica and me, trying to process this information. I could see Jessica standing there with triumph written all over her face, finally having revealed the secret she'd been holding over my head for decades. For a moment, I sat there feeling the familiar shame and otherness that Jessica's comments had always triggered. For a moment, I felt like the imposter she'd always made me feel like. Then I remembered the letters. I remembered Catherine Williams crying with joy when she met me. I remembered the trust fund that had been waiting for me for 13 years. I remembered that being adopted didn't make me less loved. It made me more loved. I stood up slowly, reaching into my purse for the envelope I'd been carrying for 2 months. "You know what, Jessica?" I said, my voice calm and clear. "You're absolutely right. I am adopted. And I found out about it the same way you did." I held up the letter from Richardson Associates. "When I found this letter hidden in your old bedroom 3 months ago." Jessica's face went from triumphant to confused to terrified in the span of about 3 seconds. "This letter," I continued, unfolding it carefully, "is from the law firm that handled my adoption. It was sent to Mom and Dad 31 years ago, but somehow it ended up hidden behind your dresser instead of with them." I began to read from the letter, my voice carrying clearly across the silent dining room. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Chen, our client Catherine Williams has asked us to provide you with this update regarding the child you adopted through our firm in March 1992. I looked directly at Jessica, whose face had gone completely white. That child would be me, and the update they were providing was about a trust fund that my biological mother had established for my future education and welfare. The room was so quiet you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the living room. According to this letter, that trust fund was worth $847,000 31 years ago and would be accessible to me when I turned 18. I folded the letter and put it back in my purse. Now, I'm curious, Jessica. This letter was addressed to our parents, but somehow it ended up hidden in your room. Can you explain how that happened? Jessica was staring at me like she'd seen a ghost, probably realizing that her moment of triumph had just turned into her moment of complete exposure. I don't know how that got there, she stammered. Really? I said. Because I think you intercepted this letter when you were 10 years old. I think you read it and realized that I was adopted and that there was money involved. I think you kept that information to yourself for 25 years and used it to make me feel like an outsider in my own family. I looked around the table at relatives who were processing this information with varying degrees of shock and understanding. But here's what Jessica didn't know when she decided to humiliate me tonight, I continued. I've spent the last 3 months getting to know my biological mother, Catherine Williams. I've read 31 years worth of letters she wrote to me every birthday. And I've accessed that trust fund, which is now worth just over $3 million. The gasps around the table were audible. Jessica looked like she was about to faint. Catherine Williams is an amazing woman who made the difficult decision to place me for adoption because she wanted me to have the best possible life. She chose Mom and Dad specifically because she knew they would love me unconditionally. She's been providing for my future from a distance for my entire life, asking for nothing in return except the knowledge that I was happy and loved. I turned to my parents, who were both crying quietly. Mom, Dad, I want you to know that meeting Catherine hasn't changed how I feel about you at all. You are my parents. You raised me, you loved me, you supported my dreams, you made me who I am today. Finding out I was adopted doesn't make me love you less. It makes me grateful that Catherine chose you to be my family. Then I turned back to Jessica, who was still standing there holding her wine glass like a weapon that had backfired. But Jessica, you stole 25 years from me. 25 years of knowing who I really was. 25 years of understanding that being adopted made me special, not defective. 25 years of knowing I had a biological mother who loved me enough to give me the best life possible. I sat back down, feeling calmer than I had in months. So yes, I'm adopted. And I'm proud of it. I'm proud that Catherine Williams was brave enough to choose life for me even when it was difficult. I'm proud that Mom and Dad were generous enough to take in a baby who wasn't biologically theirs and love her like their own. I'm proud to be part of a family that was built on choice and love rather than just genetics. The room erupted in voices as relatives began processing what they just heard, asking questions, expressing support, trying to understand the family drama that had just exploded over Thanksgiving dinner. But I only cared about 3 reactions. My mom came over and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Sarah, honey, I'm so sorry you found out this way. We should have told you years ago. We were scared of how you'd react, scared you'd feel like you didn't belong. I've always belonged, I said, hugging her back. I just didn't understand how many people I belonged to. My dad joined the hug, his voice thick with emotion. We're so proud of you, sweetheart. We're proud of the woman you've become, and we're proud of how you handled this situation. You showed more grace than we probably deserved. And Jessica? Jessica sat back down heavily in her chair, staring at her plate like she wished she could disappear. The rest of the evening was a blur of conversations and explanations and family members processing the revelation that I was adopted and that Jessica had been keeping this secret for decades. Most of the relatives were supportive and understanding, expressing amazement at how well my parents had handled the adoption and how successful I'd become. A few of the older relatives made comments about blood family versus chosen family, but they were quickly shut down by others who pointed out that love and dedication matter more than genetics. Jessica barely spoke for the rest of the night. When relatives would ask her questions about how long she'd known or why she'd kept it secret, she'd mumble something about not thinking it was her place to say anything. But everyone could see through her excuses. When it was time to leave, Jessica approached me in the kitchen while I was helping my mom with dishes. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I need to talk to you." "I think you've said enough for one night," I replied without looking at her. "Please, I want to explain." I turned to face her, seeing for the first time in years that Jessica looked genuinely vulnerable rather than calculating. "Explain what? How you intercepted mail that wasn't meant for you? How you used information about my adoption to make me feel like an outsider for 25 years? How you chose tonight, in front of our entire extended family, to humiliate me rather than having an honest conversation?" Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't feeling particularly sympathetic. "I was 10 years old when I found that letter," she said. "I didn't understand what it meant at first. I just knew it was about you being adopted and that there was money involved. And instead of giving it to Mom and Dad, you hid it." "I was scared," she said. "I was scared that you were going to replace me, that Mom and Dad would love you more because you were special, because you came with this money, because you were chosen." I stared at her, realizing that Jessica's cruelty toward me had come from a place of deep insecurity and fear. "So you decided to make me feel like I didn't belong here. I thought if you felt different, if you felt like an outsider, then Mom and Dad wouldn't see you as their real daughter. I thought it would protect my place in the family. Jessica, you were their biological daughter. You were never in danger of being replaced." "But you were so good at everything," she said, the words pouring out like a confession. "You were smart and athletic and successful. You made them proud in ways I never could. I was afraid that if you also knew you were special enough to be chosen, if you knew you had this other family who loved you, if you knew you had all this money, I was afraid there would be no room left for me." I looked at my sister, this woman who had tormented me for decades out of her own fear and insecurity, and I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. "Jessica, there was always room for both of us. Mom and Dad have enough love for multiple children. They've never made either of us feel like we had to compete for their affection." "I know that now," she said. "I've known it for years, but by then, it was too late to undo what I'd done. I'd hidden the letter for so long, I'd made so many comments about you being different, I'd built this whole dynamic between us based on keeping you in the dark." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "And the longer it went on, the more ashamed I became of what I'd done. How do you tell someone you've been psychologically tormenting them for 25 years because you were jealous of their adoption?" "You start by apologizing," I said, "and then you work to make it right." Jessica nodded, seeming to understand that her public humiliation tonight had backfired in ways she'd never intended. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry for all of it. I'm sorry for hiding the letter. I'm sorry for making you feel like you didn't belong. I'm sorry for using your adoption against you instead of celebrating it. And I'm sorry for tonight. I was angry about your success, jealous of your money, frustrated that everything always seems to work out for you. I wanted to take you down a peg, but instead I just showed everyone what kind of person I really am." I looked at Jessica, weighing her apology against 25 years of psychological manipulation. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally. "But Jessica, this isn't something you can just say sorry for and move on. You stole major pieces of my identity from me. You made me spend my entire life feeling like I was performing a role I didn't understand. You kept me from knowing about a biological mother who loved me and provided for me." I paused, making sure she understood the magnitude of what she'd done. "I'm willing to work toward forgiveness, but it's going to take time. And it's going to require you to figure out why you thought psychological torture was an acceptable way to handle your own insecurities." Jessica nodded, accepting that there would be consequences for her choices that couldn't be erased with a single apology. "I understand," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes to try to make this right." "Good," I said, "because we're going to start with you telling Mom and Dad the truth about how you found that letter and why you hid it. They deserve to know what really happened." The conversation with my parents happened the next morning. Jessica and I sat them down in their living room, and she confessed everything. How she'd found the letter when she was 10, how she'd hidden it out of jealousy and fear, how she'd spent 25 years using my adoption to make me feel like an outsider. My parents' reactions were exactly what I'd expected. Disappointment, hurt, confusion about how to handle a situation they'd never imagined facing. "Jessica," my mom said quietly, "how could you keep something this important from us for so long?" "I was scared," Jessica repeated the explanation she'd given me the night before. "But sweetheart," my dad said, "we would have helped you work through those feelings. We would have made sure both of you understood how much you were loved." "I know that now," Jessica said. "But when I was 10, all I could think about was protecting my place in the family." My parents spent the next hour asking questions, trying to understand the psychology behind Jessica's choices, working through their own feelings of betrayal and disappointment. It was painful but necessary, the kind of honest conversation our family should have had decades earlier. "What happens now?" my mom asked finally. "Now we figure out how to move forward as a family," I said, with honesty this time. The next few weeks were complicated. Jessica started therapy to work through the insecurities and jealousies that had driven her to such destructive behavior. My parents and I had long conversations about the adoption, about their fears and motivations in keeping it secret, about how we could have handled things differently. But the most important development was my growing relationship with Catherine Williams and her family. Meeting my biological siblings, David and Emma, was surprisingly easy. They were both excited to have an older sister and welcomed me into their family dynamic with genuine warmth. David was studying engineering in college, and Emma was in high school, both of them curious about my life and career. "We've heard about you our whole lives," Emma told me during one of our family dinners. "Mom would always tell us stories about wondering what you were doing, hoping you were happy, being proud of your achievements." Catherine's husband, Michael, was equally welcoming, treating me like the daughter he'd always known I was, even though we'd never met. "Catherine has loved you your entire life," he told me during a quiet moment at one of our get-togethers. "Having you in our lives now feels like a gift we never expected to receive." The financial aspect of the inheritance required careful consideration. $3 million was life-changing money, but I'd already been financially successful through my own work. After consulting with financial advisors and tax attorneys, I decided to use part of the money to establish a scholarship fund for students aging out of the foster care system, something that felt like a meaningful way to honor Catherine's generosity. "I love that idea," Catherine said when I told her about the scholarship fund. "You're taking something that was meant to give you opportunities and using it to create opportunities for others." I also used some of the money to help my adoptive parents with their retirement planning and to contribute to educational funds for my biological siblings. The money felt like a bridge between my two families, a way to honor both the parents who raised me and the mother who provided for my future. But beyond the financial implications, having complete information about my identity was transformative in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time in my life, I understood why I looked the way I did, why I had certain personality traits, why I was drawn to specific interests and careers. I learned that Catherine had been a gifted student and athlete in high school, that she had the same stubborn streak and competitive drive that had characterized my own academic and professional success. I also learned that she came from a family of strong women who valued independence and achievement, which explained some of the traits that had always made me feel different from my adoptive family's more traditional expectations. Meeting my biological family didn't diminish my love for my adoptive parents, but it did give me a more complete sense of self. I was no longer performing a role I didn't understand. I was integrating different aspects of my identity into a coherent whole. The relationship with Jessica remained complicated. She was making genuine efforts to change, attending therapy regularly, and working to understand the psychological patterns that had led to her destructive behavior. But trust, once broken so thoroughly, takes time to rebuild. "I know I can't undo 25 years of damage," she told me during one of our supervised conversations with a family therapist. "But I want you to know that I see now how wrong I was, how much pain I caused you, how my own insecurities turned me into someone I'm ashamed of." "I appreciate that," I said. "But Jessica, understanding why you did something doesn't automatically make it forgivable. You didn't just keep a secret from me. You actively used that secret to psychologically manipulate me for decades." "I know," she said, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that." The family therapist helped us work through some of the dynamics that had contributed to our toxic relationship. Jessica's fear of being replaced, my confusion about my identity, our parents' well-intentioned but ultimately harmful decision to keep the adoption secret. Secrets have a way of creating distance and misunderstanding in families, the therapist explained. Even when they're kept with good intentions, they often end up causing more harm than the truth would have. It was a lesson our entire family took to heart. 6 months after the Thanksgiving revelation, we held what we called a Truth and Reconciliation family dinner. Both sets of my parents, both sets of my siblings, aunts and uncles and cousins, who wanted to be part of our expanded definition of family. It was beautiful and complicated and messy in all the ways that real families are. Catherine and my adoptive parents hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love for me and their shared pride in the woman I'd become. "You did an incredible job raising her," Catherine told my mom during dinner. "She's everything I hoped she would become when I chose you to be her parents." "She's taught us as much as we've taught her," my mom replied. "We're grateful that you trusted us with such a precious gift." Jessica was quieter during that dinner, still working through her guilt and shame, but she made an effort to welcome Catherine and my biological siblings into our extended family circle. "I'm sorry it took so long for all of us to meet," she told Catherine during dessert. "Sarah should have known about you years ago." "What matters is that we're all here now," Catherine replied graciously. That dinner marked a turning point in our family dynamics. We were no longer operating from a place of secrets and hidden resentments, but from a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. Jessica and I still have work to do in rebuilding our relationship. Some damage can't be completely undone, and there are still moments when her old patterns of jealousy and manipulation surface. But she's committed to the therapy process, and I'm committed to giving her the opportunity to change. "I want to be the sister you deserve to have," she told me recently. "I want to be someone you can trust and rely on, instead of someone you have to protect yourself from." "I want that too," I said. "But it's going to take time and consistent effort. You're asking me to trust someone who spent 25 years proving that she couldn't be trusted." "I understand," she said. "I'll wait as long as it takes." My career has continued to flourish, partly because the confidence that came from understanding my complete identity has made me even more effective in my professional life. I'm no longer performing a role or trying to prove my worth. I'm simply being myself and letting my abilities speak for themselves. I've also become involved in adoption advocacy, working with organizations that help connect adoptees with their biological families when that's what everyone wants. My story has become an example of how adoption can be a beautiful thing when it's handled with openness and honesty. The key is making sure everyone understands that adoption doesn't mean replacement, I told a group of prospective adoptive parents during a workshop I spoke at. It means expansion. A child who's adopted doesn't lose their original identity, they gain additional sources of love and support. The scholarship fund I established has already helped 12 students transition from foster care to college, providing not just financial support, but mentorship and guidance as they navigate higher education. Having someone believe in your potential when you've aged out of the system can make all the difference, one of the scholarship recipients told me. It's not just about the money, it's about knowing that someone cares about your success. That comment reminded me of Catherine's letters, of the love and support she'd provided from a distance for 31 years. The scholarship fund was my way of paying that forward, of making sure other young people had the kind of support and opportunities that both my families had provided for me. Looking back on that Thanksgiving dinner, I realized that Jessica's attempt to humiliate me actually gave me the greatest gift imaginable, the truth about who I really was. Her malicious revelation forced conversations that should have happened years earlier. It brought my biological family back into my life. It helped my adoptive parents understand that keeping secrets, even with good intentions, can cause more harm than honesty. Most importantly, it taught me that my worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or by the circumstances of my birth. I am valuable because of who I am, what I've accomplished, how I treat others, and the love I both give and receive. The letter Jessica hid for 25 years was meant to inform my parents about resources available for my future. But in the end, it became the key to unlocking a future none of us had imagined possible. I now have 2 sets of parents who love me unconditionally, 4 siblings who support and encourage me, and an extended family that spans multiple households but shares common values of honesty, respect, and mutual support. Jessica's attempt to make me feel like I didn't belong anywhere backfired spectacularly. Instead, she helped me discover that I belong everywhere. The trust fund Catherine established has given me financial security, but more importantly, it was proof that I was loved and valued even before I was born. The letter she wrote showed me that I was thought about and cared for every single day of my life, even when I didn't know she existed. And the relationship I've built with both my families has shown me that love isn't limited by biology or convention. Families can be built through choice, commitment, and the daily decision to support each other through life's challenges and celebrations. If there's a lesson in my story, it's this. Secrets have a way of poisoning relationships, but truth has a way of setting everyone free. The revelation that I was adopted could have been devastating if it had been handled with cruelty and shame. Instead, it became the foundation for deeper, more honest relationships with everyone I love. Jessica thought she was exposing a shameful secret that would diminish my place in our family. What she actually did was reveal a beautiful truth that expanded my family in ways none of us had imagined possible. Sometimes the worst thing someone can do to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that ever happens to you. And sometimes the letter someone hides becomes the key to unlocking everything you never knew you were missing. 3 weeks ago, I was Sarah Chen, the adopted daughter who never quite fit in with her family's expectations. Today, I'm Sarah Chen, the beloved daughter of 2 sets of parents, the successful tech executive, the scholarship founder, the woman who knows exactly who she is and where she comes from. I'm still adopted. I'm still different from my adoptive family in some ways. I still have curly auburn hair and green eyes that don't match anyone else's in our holiday photos. But now I understand that being different isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to be celebrated. Jessica spent 25 years trying to make me feel like an outsider. What she actually did was help me discover that I'm an insider in more places than I ever imagined possible. The letter she hid was supposed to be about money and legal arrangements. But it turned out to be about something much more valuable: love, identity, and the truth that sets you free. If you've ever felt like you don't belong, if anyone has ever made you feel like your differences make you less valuable, if you've ever wondered about the missing pieces of your own story, remember this: you belong exactly where you are, and the truth about who you are is worth fighting for. Sometimes the people who try to tear you down end up being the ones who help you discover how strong you really are. And sometimes the secret they think will destroy you becomes the truth that finally makes you whole.